Now to the double murder in Wilson County. We're learning the suspect is charged with killing his own brother and his mother. Police identifying the victims as 50-year-old Dana Jenkins and her 15-year-old son, Darren Cox. Jenkins' 25-year-old son, Darion Jenkins, is now charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. The victims were found inside a home yesterday evening on Snowden Drive. Cindy Bay has new reaction from the family.
Loved ones are reeling from the death of a mother and son who police say were found dead inside their Wilson home on Monday.
She was a very sweet person. Always smiled. I can see her smile right now. She always smiled.
Juanelia Carnegie lives next door to her cousin Dana Jenkins, who was allegedly killed by her older son, 25-year-old Darion Jenkins. Jenkins is also accused of killing his 15-year-old brother, a Wilson County school student who is being remembered by Bedingfield High School and Mount Moriah Community Church in Wilson.
They loved each other. They loved us. We loved them, especially Darren. He meant the world to all of us. Our teens here, they're grieving heavily.
According to court documents, Jenkins was released from prison on March 25th on separate charges, just 1 week before the incident. Jenkins is facing 2 counts of first-degree murder as Wilson police investigate the circumstances surrounding the victims' deaths.
This is a tragedy, and honestly, there is no winner in this. And I'll be praying for everyone watching this, everyone affected by this and impacted by this.
Cindy Bay, ABC 11 Eyewitness News.
She welcomed him home from prison. 7 days later, she and her youngest son were dead. What happened inside that home? And how did a second chance turn into a death sentence? On a quiet Monday evening in Wilson, North Carolina, a 911 call shattered the stillness. A woman and her teenage son were found dead inside their home. Neighbors had heard nothing. No screams, no struggle. But inside the modest house on Snowden Drive, police found a horror scene. Blood soaked the walls. The victims, 50-year-old Dana Vanessa Jenkins and her 15-year-old son Darren Cox, had been violently stabbed. The killer? He didn't flee. He didn't hide. He sat there calmly, waiting to be arrested. The alleged murderer was Dana's oldest son, 25-year-old Deron Dante Jenkins, Darren's own brother. What makes this case even more haunting is what had just happened days before. Deron had been released from prison only a week earlier. He had come home to his mother's house, supposedly for a fresh start. Dana welcomed him, hoping for peace, hoping her son had changed. But within days, her act of love became the reason for her death. Friends say Dana was a woman who believed in second chances. She forgave easily. She never gave up on her children, and it cost her everything. In the moments leading up to the murders, something had snapped. Police found Deron with cuts on his hands and blood on his clothes. Inside the home, Dana and Darren's bodies told a story of brutal rage. This wasn't a quick act. It was prolonged, violent, and deeply personal. Deron had a criminal history. He'd been locked up for vehicle break-ins and stealing firearms. But no one thought he would take it this far. Especially not Dana. Especially not Darren, who still looked up to his older brother. This isn't just a murder story. It's a story about a mother's hope, a boy's future, and a family broken beyond repair. A woman who gave everything, and a son who gave her death in return. Welcome to True Crime Diaries, the place where we uncover shocking stories, unsolved cases, and deep mysteries from the world of crime. From real events to breakthroughs in investigation, we break it all down so you can see what really happened. Before we begin, don't forget to tap the subscribe button. Drop a comment below. Where are you watching from? Drop your thoughts as this story unfolds. Your opinion counts. These are real people, real events, and serious lessons we must not ignore. Share this video with someone you care about. It could make a difference, maybe even save a life. Let's get started. In the heart of Wilson, North Carolina, lived a woman named Dana Vanessa Jenkins. At 50 years old, Dana had built her life around her 2 sons. She wasn't famous, wealthy, or widely known beyond her street. But in her home, she was everything. She was the provider, the comforter, the protector. She believed in the power of second chances and gave her love freely, even when it came with risks. Dana Vanessa Jenkins was 50 years old. To Minnie and Wilson, she was more than just a mother. She was a loving presence in the community. She raised her children with care, often going above and beyond to make sure they had what they needed. Dana worked hard, sometimes juggling multiple jobs to support her boys. She was described by friends as nurturing, hopeful, and deeply forgiving. She had a strong faith, which influenced how she handled conflict, even when it came from her own children. Dana believed in redemption. When her oldest son, Duran, got in trouble with the law, she stood by him. She visited him while he was incarcerated, wrote letters, and even prayed for his release. When he got out, she opened her home to him once again. She wanted him to start over. Her youngest son, Darren, was the light of her life. At just 15, he had big dreams. He was doing well in school and loved video games and basketball. He was quiet, respectful, and full of potential. Dana's life was one of sacrifice and love. Her death, brutal and sudden, shocked the entire town. No one expected that her own act of kindness, welcoming her son back, would end in such betrayal. Dana raised her boys, Duran and Darren, mostly on her own. Life wasn't always easy. There were financial struggles, discipline challenges, and the weight of raising two sons in a world that often failed young black boys. But Dana stood firm. She worked hard, made sacrifices, and kept the peace in her home the best she could. Her youngest son, Darren, was her quiet joy, a respectful 15-year-old with promise, politeness, and ambition. Her oldest, Duran, had drifted into trouble, but she never stopped praying for his change. Despite his troubled past, Dana never gave up on Duran. Even when he was arrested and sentenced to prison, she wrote letters, sent small amounts of money, and made sure he never felt forgotten. She didn't hide her disappointment, but she held on to the hope that one day he would turn his life around. Her belief in redemption wasn't just spiritual, it was personal. People who knew Dana say she had a soft heart but a strong will. She often looked tired, but she smiled anyway. She spoke about her sons with pride, even when the reality was more complicated. She believed love could fix what life had broken. But how far should a mother's love go? And what happens when that love is taken for granted, or worse, used against her? In the days leading up to her death, Dana had welcomed Duran back into her home after he was released from prison. For her, it was a fresh start for him, a new chance to be better. She hoped this time things would be different. Did she ignore red flags out of love? Did she sense any danger? Or was she simply doing what any mother would, choosing love over fear? Her home, once a place of safety, would soon become a crime scene. But before that tragic night, Dana was just a mother trying to hold her family together. She didn't have bodyguards or protection. All she had was her belief that her son could be saved. Can love ever truly protect someone from harm? And when loyalty and danger live under the same roof, how do you know when it's time to draw the line? Duran Dante Jenkins was not a stranger to law enforcement. From his late teens, trouble seemed to follow him, or perhaps he ran toward it. By the time he was in his early 20s, he had already built a criminal record that included firearm theft and breaking into vehicles. His choices led him in and out of the system, stripping him of trust and opportunities, while steadily widening the gap between him and the stable life his mother hoped he'd live. As a child, Duran had been spirited and bold. Teachers described him as smart but distracted. At home, he was unpredictable, some days quiet, other days easily angered. Dana tried her best to guide him, often turning to discipline, church, and conversations that lasted late into the night. She believed that the boy she raised could still be reached, even when the outside world labeled him lost. His descent into crime wasn't instant, but rather a slow erosion of discipline and direction. Small thefts turned into bigger ones. Skipping school became staying out for days. Friends changed. Priorities shifted. Eventually, he stopped hiding the lifestyle he was embracing. Dana confronted him, tried to intervene, but the damage was deepening and her reach was limited. In prison, Duran was reported to have moments of calm, short-lived sparks of change. Some said he regretted his actions. Others weren't sure. What was clear was that Dana never stopped believing in the possibility of his transformation. She stayed in contact, visited when she could, and always reminded him that he had a home waiting for him. To her, prison wasn't the end of the road. It was just another detour on his journey back. The state released Duran in March 2025 after he served time for larceny involving firearms and stolen vehicles. He was only out for about a week before the tragedy occurred. During that short time, he returned to Dana's house and rejoined his younger brother Darren, who had lived his own, very different life. There were no public signs of violence, no police reports, just a family trying to reconnect after years of division. But internally, Duran may have carried the weight of failure, resentment, and mental instability. No official documents have confirmed if he sought therapy or counseling during or after his incarceration. He remained distant from most people outside the home, giving no warning to the outside world that anything was wrong. His presence in the house was quiet, but it was the kind of quiet that can turn deadly. By the time anyone realized something was wrong, it was already too late. What Dana had seen as a new chapter was only the final one. Duran's release didn't mark a second chance. Instead, it became the prelude to an unimaginable act that would silence a mother's hope and shatter what remained of her family. When Duran Jenkins walked out of prison in late March 2025, his future was uncertain. With no stable income, no concrete plans, and a criminal record behind him, the only place he had to go was back to his mother's home. Dana Jenkins, despite everything, welcomed him without hesitation. For her, it was not just about shelter. It was about hope, about trying again to give her son a life beyond his mistakes. Inside the modest home on Snowden Drive, the atmosphere shifted. Darren Cox, Dana's 15-year-old son, had grown up in a more structured environment than his older brother. He followed the rules, went to school, and spent time gaming or chatting with friends. The arrival of Duran changed the household's rhythm. Though there were no physical confrontations in the days that followed, the emotional tension was noticeable. Neighbors who saw Duran after his release described him as quiet, withdrawn. He often stayed inside, barely making eye contact with anyone. He didn't interact with others on the street and didn't appear to be looking for work or socializing. At home, his behavior remained low-key but unpredictable. His silence made it difficult to read his mental state or intentions. Dana tried to create peace between her sons. She encouraged conversations, made meals they both liked, and attempted to keep things normal. To her, this was a crucial time to reestablish family unity. She had been through enough heartache and believed that love could pull them all through it. She held on to structure, chores, curfews, routines, but the emotional weight inside the home was growing heavier by the day. Darren, still just a teenager, tried to stay out of the way. He was respectful to his older brother, but not particularly close to him. Their worlds had been too different for too long. Darren had been a boy of potential, focused on his future, while Duran had been shaped by the system and the streets. Still, the home remained quiet. No one raised alarms. There were no loud arguments, no signs of physical violence. By the evening of March 31st, the fragile calm had reached its breaking point. Something inside Duran gave way. No witnesses reported hearing anything unusual from the house that evening. But when police arrived after a concerned call from a family member, they walked into a chilling and silent crime scene. Dana and Darren were both dead, brutally killed inside the very house that was supposed to help Duran start again. Duran didn't run. He didn't resist arrest. When officers found him, he had injuries on his hand, likely from the act itself. He was taken into custody without incident, his expression blank.
Just released from prison last week, is now charged with killing his mother and younger brother after they were found dead in their Wilson County home on Monday.
Today, a family member who lives right next door is talking with WITN. Amarachi Uche is live in Wilson with more. And Amarachi, what did they tell you?
Yeah, Darian Jenkins is facing 2 counts of first-degree murder after police say he killed his mother and younger brother. They were found dead here in this home behind me. Now the cousin of the mother is speaking to us, trying to figure out how this could have happened.
I always smile. I can see her smile right now. She always smiled.
That's how Wanilia Cornigi describes her cousin, Dana Jenkins. Now she is left shocked and hurt after learning Jenkins was found dead in her Wilson home alongside her 15-year-old son. The suspect in these horrific murders, Jenkins's older son.
I would have never thought that. I would have never thought he would do something like that. Not like this.
On March 31st, 2025, just after 5 p.m., the Wilson Police Department received a disturbing call. Officers were dispatched to a residence on Snowden Drive for a welfare check. What they encountered was a nightmare. 2 lifeless bodies inside a quiet residential home. Both victims, a mother and her teenage son, had suffered multiple stab wounds. The bloodied scene pointed not to a random act of violence, but something intimate and deliberate. Dana Jenkins was found in the hallway, collapsed near the living room. Her injuries were extensive and fatal. She had clearly fought for her life. A trail of blood led toward a nearby bedroom, where her 15-year-old son, Darren Cox, lay motionless. There were no signs of forced entry. Nothing was stolen. The house was otherwise undisturbed. It was clear this was not a robbery gone wrong, but a targeted, personal attack from someone who knew the victims.
Police say on Monday they went to this home on Snowden Drive shortly before 5:30 p.m. and found 50-year-old Dana Jenkins and a 15-year-old boy dead. According to Cornigi, the 15-year-old's name is Darren. Tuesday, police say they have the son of Dana and the older brother to Darren, Darian Jenkins, in custody for these deaths. Cornigi says that in the days leading up to the murders, she felt something was off with Darian.
You could see it, the look. It told you everything. But I had no idea that you was getting ready to do what you did.
This church is where Dana and Darren found comfort. Bishop Sherman Blandon says he knew them well.
It has been very difficult, confusing, troubling.
Cornigi remembers speaking to her cousin Sunday night and seeing police around the building the next day, telling her that 2 of her family members were now gone. The 25-year-old now faces 2 counts of first-degree murder, leaving Cornigi wondering how this could have happened.
Couldn't figure out why he did it and what for.
Cornigi says they just had 5 deaths in the family, so these murders only add to that pain. She says she's now going to take it one day at a time and remember the good times she had with her cousin. Reporting live in Wilson, Amarachi Uche, WITN News.
The home on Snowden Drive, once filled with effort and care, had become a place marked by devastation. What was meant to be a safe haven ended as the site of a double murder. Standing inside the house when police arrived was 25-year-old Darren Jenkins. He had visible cuts on his hands and clothing stained with blood. Officers noted his flat demeanor. No panic, no signs of shock. He complied with instructions and was taken into custody on the spot. There was no need to search for a suspect. The evidence surrounded him, and the relationship to the victims was undeniable. Forensic experts later confirmed that the wounds inflicted on Dana and Darren were consistent with close-range, frenzied stabbing. The number of injuries suggested uncontrolled rage rather than a premeditated, calculated plan. Yet there were no drugs or alcohol in the system of the victims, and no prior reports of violent behavior in the days leading up to the attack. Investigators were left to piece together how such a brutal act could unfold without warning. Detectives interviewed family members and neighbors. Everyone described Dana as kind, hopeful, and deeply devoted to her children. Darren was remembered as polite, friendly, and focused on school. No one could recall any recent arguments or signs of danger. The murders blindsided the community and investigators alike. There was only one person who could explain the motive, and he wasn't saying anything. Darren was booked into the Wilson County Jail and charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. He was held without bond. Police confirmed he had been released from prison just 1 week earlier, making the timeline of the crime all the more disturbing. A mother had opened her door to her son, and within days, she and her youngest child were dead. News of the killings spread quickly. Media outlets reported the shocking details, and headlines carried the tragedy across the state. The story wasn't just about a double murder. It was about the betrayal of family, the collapse of trust, and the danger that had been hiding in plain sight. As investigators continued their work, the full weight of what happened inside that house began to settle in. A home meant for healing had become a scene of irreversible loss. The deaths of Dana Jenkins and her 15-year-old son, Darren Cox, sent ripples of sorrow through the Wilson community. Friends, neighbors, church members, and former co-workers struggled to make sense of the tragedy. In a town where violent crime was rare, the news felt like something out of a nightmare. For many, it was not just the brutality of the crime that hurt. It was who the victims were and who had taken their lives. Dana had been a familiar face to many in her neighborhood. She was known for checking in on elderly neighbors, offering help without being asked, and attending local church functions with Darren. Those who knew her described her as genuine, hardworking, and endlessly patient. She was a woman who made time for others, even when she had little to spare herself. Her loss left a deep void, and the circumstances surrounding it made the pain even harder to bear. Darren's school released a public statement mourning the death of a student who was described as respectful, quiet, and full of potential. His teachers remembered him as someone who never caused trouble and always completed his work on time. His classmates were stunned, many unable to process how someone they had just spoken to days earlier could be gone so suddenly and violently. Counselors were brought in to help students deal with the emotional toll. The family organized a funeral service just days after the bodies were released. Hundreds attended. The church pews were filled with loved ones, friends, and community members who didn't even know the family personally but felt drawn to support them. Photos of Dana and Darren stood at the front of the room, framed in flowers. People wept openly. Some stood in silence, unable to find the words. The grief was collective, and so was the confusion. During the service, several people shared memories of Dana's unwavering love and strength. Others spoke of Darren's dreams to graduate, possibly attend college, and give back to his mother for all she had done. His death cut short a future that had only just begun. The ceremony was filled with emotion, music, prayers, and moments of silence for a life taken too soon and a mother who gave everything. In the days that followed, a memorial began to form outside the house. Balloons, candles, stuffed animals, and handwritten messages lined the steps. The home, now a crime scene, had become a place of mourning. It stood as a visual reminder of the pain that had taken root in the hearts of so many. Reporters who visited the site were met with hushed voices, bowed heads, and tears from those still in disbelief. Behind the public grief, the family faced unimaginable emotional wreckage. Dana's relatives had lost a sister, a daughter, and a nephew in the same moment. The betrayal by Darren only deepened the trauma. As the legal process began to unfold, those left behind were forced to confront not only the loss, but the impossible task of healing in the shadow of such cruelty. As detectives worked through the grim details of the case, the search for motive became central. There was no clear trigger, no documented argument, no history of physical violence between Darren Jenkins and his mother or younger brother. But the crime scene told a different story, one of rage, intensity, and emotional chaos. Investigators believe that whatever happened inside that house on March 31st had been boiling beneath the surface long before it erupted. Police combed through Darren's recent release records, spoke with corrections officers, and reviewed his behavior while in custody. Nothing in the official files pointed to mental instability or a violent outburst waiting to happen. However, the quiet demeanor he displayed post-release now raised red flags. He had withdrawn from nearly everyone, including his family, and spoke very little in the days leading up to the murders. To law enforcement, that silence may have masked something much darker. Friends and extended relatives offered insight into Darren's past. Many mentioned his difficulty adjusting to life after previous jail stints. They spoke of his struggle with anger and detachment. Some believed he felt resentment toward Dana for not being able to fix his life, while others speculated jealousy toward Darren, who represented everything Darren had lost: a fresh start, structure, and potential. These assumptions weren't confirmed, but they shaped the direction of the investigation. The autopsy results confirmed that both Dana and Darren had suffered multiple stab wounds, consistent with a close-range attack. There was no indication that either victim had been armed or had fought back long enough to escape. The wounds were concentrated and deep, which investigators believed reflected uncontrolled emotion rather than a calculated plan. The lack of defensive injuries on Darren, in particular, suggested he may have been caught off guard or attacked in his sleep. The murder weapon, a kitchen knife, was recovered at the scene. It belonged to the home and had no signs of prior tampering. Forensic analysis showed that Duran's fingerprints were present, along with blood from both victims. This evidence, combined with his injuries and the circumstances of his arrest, made the case against him overwhelmingly strong. Police confirmed there were no other suspects. Prosecutors began building a case for first-degree murder, supported by the brutality of the attack and the familial relationship between the suspect and the victims. The district attorney's office considered seeking the maximum penalty allowed by law. There is also a possibility that mental health evaluations would be introduced during the trial phase, depending on Duran's legal defense strategy. As the legal proceedings moved forward, investigators continued piecing together the emotional and psychological factors that may have led to the killings. They searched for warning signs that had been missed, opportunities for intervention that never came, and the invisible cracks that had slowly split a fragile family apart. After the police tape was removed and the investigators packed up their gear, the house on Snowden Drive stood in eerie silence. The once warm, lived-in home was now a crime scene etched with memories that would haunt anyone who stepped inside. The pictures were still on the walls. Furniture sat undisturbed, except for the areas marked with bloodstains and evidence tags. The walls no longer echoed with laughter or footsteps, just the weight of what had taken place. Dana Jenkins had worked hard to make that house a place of peace. Over the years, she had added little touches, a family photo in the hallway, a vase of fresh flowers by the window, Darren's school certificates framed with pride. She had kept it clean, organized, and welcoming. But those small symbols of care now stood in stark contrast to the horror that had unfolded within those same walls. In the weeks following the tragedy, the family home remained unoccupied. Relatives came by to collect personal items, each visit filled with pain and hesitation. No one wanted to be inside longer than necessary. The neighborhood grew quieter, as if out of respect or fear. Children no longer played nearby, and neighbors spoke in hushed tones when passing the house. It became a symbol of loss that couldn't be ignored. Local organizations began discussing the broader implications of the case. Some community leaders called for better mental health support for recently released inmates. Others focused on domestic violence awareness and the dangers of unspoken family tension. Dana's story became part of a larger conversation, one that touched on rehabilitation, forgiveness, and the risks families take when trying to mend what the world has broken. The school where Darren had studied planted a tree in his memory. Staff and students gathered in silence as a plaque was unveiled at its base. His absence was deeply felt among classmates, teachers, and friends who had expected to see him graduate one day. The school's hallways were never quite the same. The tree stood as both a tribute and a reminder of a life ended too soon. Media coverage of the case began to slow, but for those closest to Dana and Darren, the aftermath never faded. Grief had taken root, settling into the daily lives of relatives and friends. Holidays came and went without their presence. Birthdays passed uncelebrated. The weight of what had happened lingered like a shadow that refused to lift. As the trial date for Duran approached, the pain returned to the surface. His name was now linked forever to a brutal act that destroyed the very people who had once believed in him. The story had begun in a place of hope and ended in devastation. What remained was a cold, empty house and a family that would never be whole again. As the court process began to unfold, the weight of the crimes committed by Duran Dante Jenkins shifted from the home he destroyed to the courtroom where he would be judged. Prosecutors prepared a strong case built on physical evidence, witness accounts, and Duran's own presence at the crime scene. The charges, 2 counts of first-degree murder, were among the most serious in the state's legal system, carrying the possibility of life imprisonment without parole. Defense attorneys requested a full psychiatric evaluation to determine Duran's mental competency. His history, emotional behavior, and demeanor following the killings raised questions about his state of mind at the time of the incident. The defense team indicated they may explore an insanity plea, though the prosecution remained firm in its pursuit of accountability. They argued that the brutality of the attack, combined with its proximity to Duran's release from prison, showed conscious intent. Court documents revealed a timeline of events leading up to the murders. Investigators shared that no calls for help were made from inside the house. There are no signs of forced entry and no struggle from outside parties. Everything pointed inward. The prosecution emphasized that this was a betrayal carried out in a place of safety, by someone given shelter, support, and trust. Family members attended the hearings, their faces drawn and tired. Some sat silently. Others openly wept as evidence was presented. The courtroom, though filled with legal procedure, carried the heavy presence of grief and disbelief. Photographs of the crime scene, medical examiner reports, and personal items belonging to the victims were all submitted as part of the case file. Each piece of evidence added another layer to an already unbearable reality. Outside the courthouse, community members gathered in solidarity with the family. Small vigils were held near the building during key court dates. Signs bearing Dana and Darren's names were displayed alongside candles and flowers. Their deaths had not faded from public memory. Instead, they had become a reminder of how quickly lives can be changed and taken by violence within a family. As the trial progressed, legal experts weighed in on the complexities of the case. The defense would have to prove that Duran lacked the capacity to understand his actions, while the prosecution focused on the evidence and the timeline of the attack. With such a high-profile case, the judge moved carefully, balancing the rights of the accused with the community's demand for justice. The final verdict had yet to be reached, but the damage had already been done. A mother and her child were gone. A family had been torn apart, and the man at the center of it all now sat behind bars once more. This time not for theft or violence against strangers, but for the irreversible destruction of his own blood. The court proceedings may bring legal closure, but for those left behind, healing would be a far longer journey. The final chapter in the story of Dana Jenkins and her son Darren Cox was not written in the courtroom. It was written in the lives left behind, forever changed by a single act of violence. What began as a mother's effort to bring her oldest son back into the fold ended in irreversible tragedy. Her home, once built on faith and forgiveness, had become a painful memory marked by bloodshed and loss. Duran Jenkins now awaited sentencing behind bars, facing the full weight of the justice system. The legal process continued to unfold, but the emotional verdict had long since been delivered. There was no sense of victory, only silence. A mother and son were gone, and the man responsible had once been a part of their daily lives, sharing their meals, sleeping under the same roof, and receiving the very care he would eventually destroy. For the community of Wilson, the impact lingered long after the headlines faded. The story became a cautionary tale about the risks of unconditional love, the gaps in mental health care, and the danger that can hide in familiar faces. Churches, schools, and local organizations began holding forums on trauma, family safety, and how to recognize signs of emotional instability before it erupts into violence. Dana's remaining relatives worked quietly to put the pieces back together. Some took in her personal belongings, others managed legal paperwork and dealt with the state's victim support services. Darren's friends returned to school carrying the memory of a classmate whose life had been filled with promise. His locker was turned into a small tribute, a place for messages, flowers, and photos from those still grieving his absence. There was no manual for how to recover from a loss like this. The family leaned on one another, relying on faith, therapy, and community support to carry them through. Birthdays, holidays, and anniversaries became painful reminders of what had been taken. Dana's voice, once a constant source of encouragement, was now only a memory. Darren's laughter no longer echoed through the halls of the school he once walked. The house on Snowden Drive eventually stood empty, its windows dark and its porch untouched. Some neighbors hoped it would be sold, others wanted it torn down. For those who lived nearby, passing it each day was a quiet reminder of how quickly life can shift from ordinary to unthinkable. It stood as a symbol of shattered trust, of a family torn apart not by strangers, but from within. In the end, the tragedy left behind more than just victims. It left behind questions, heartbreak, and a deep ache that could never be fully healed. What remained was a broken bond, one that had once tied a mother to her son through love, but was ultimately severed by the very hand she tried to help. The weight of that betrayal would echo far longer than any sentence ever could. That's a wrap on today's case. But the story doesn't stop here. There are countless voices still unheard, stories still in the shadows, and truths still waiting to be uncovered. Here at True Crime Diaries, we're dedicated to digging deep, exposing the facts, honoring the victims, and keeping their memories alive. If today's case opened your eyes, just know more powerful stories are coming. Stories that will make you pause, reflect, and ask tough questions. Hit subscribe, like this video, turn on notifications so you're always first to know when a new case drops. We post regularly, and what's coming next is something you won't want to miss. Now it's your turn. What stood out to you in today's case? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and your voice helps keep these stories alive. Until we meet again, stay informed, stay alert, stay safe, because justice begins with truth. Every voice matters. Every story deserves to be told.